whichever explanation we end up settling on as to how this virus came about, whether it's the wet market one or the laboratory one, and whether it's seen to be entirely accidental, partly accidental, or entirely deliberate. Every single one of these options, the Chinese Communist Party has to pay for it, because in every single one of these scenarios, the central thing remains not just that this happened in their country, possibly in one of the laboratories, but that they successfully deceived the world for months and did what totalitarian regimes always manage to do, which is to turn a local disaster into an absolutely global one. And I think that we have a very complex but necessary process ahead of us of disentangling ourselves from this country, this regime, I say, which has just burnt down the world economy.
And do you think it should pay reparations?
Oh, I'm for absolutely everything. I think everything should be on the table. Absolutely everything. Look, by the way, at the disgraceful way that the CCP has treated our allies and friends. It's bullying of the Australian government. I mean,
tell people about that, Douglas, because many people won't know about this.
So the Australian, I've written about this a bit recently because I take a certain interest in this corner of things. I think that I've written this in the past. I think this country has been very naive. The UK has been very naive about the Chinese Communist Party. I think we've seen it solely as a sort of gold tap and ignored the downsides that always come with it. And by the way, I told this story in The Spectator last week in my column, but I heard this story, very, very good source, 7 years ago, that after the Dalai Lama affair, which was when David Cameron, the then Prime Minister, saw the Dalai Lama, who, of course, the Chinese Communist Party loathe, for obvious reasons to do with Tibet. After David Cameron met the Dalai Lama, the Chinese Communist Party cut off trade relations with new investment deals with the UK until David Cameron announced that he was going to socially distance himself from the Dalai Lama, and then announced that he would actually never meet him again. And after issuing an incredibly groveling apology, the next time that British representatives met with their Chinese counterparts in Beijing, a copy of the British government's apology was pushed across the desk at the British officials, who were asked to stand up and read it out. And they did. And when they sat down, the Chinese Communist Party officials said with a smile, "We just wanted to know that you meant it." Now,
wow.
When I heard that then, I was pretty bowled over at anyone being so supine on my behalf or on the behalf of the British people. But that's the deal. That's the deal we've been willing to put up with, which is you get the money, you get the investment. That isn't nothing, but it means that you also have to play on their terms, and there are caveats involved. And some of them are very serious. Now, in recent days and weeks, the Australian government has come across this, because the Australian government, Australia, I should just stress, has been learning what we are just learning now faster and ahead of time because of their location and their own trade relations in recent decades with China. And I've just noticed on visits to Australia that the public there are much more aware than they are in the UK or America, I'd say even, about the fact that there are things attached to this relationship. And the Australian government, a couple of weeks ago, suggested there should be an official inquiry, independent, international, into how this all happened, how the virus originated, and how it came to spread across the world. And after the Australian government did that, the Chinese Communist Party reacted in the way it always does. It threatened Australia. Its diplomats, its ambassador to Australia said that the Chinese might stop buying Australian products, Australian beef, Australian wine, and that this was seen as a racist thing. Incidentally, one of the most prominent government mouthpiece journalists in China took to Weibo, the Chinese equivalent of Twitter. And if you think that Twitter is a totalitarian, censorious monolith. You should see their Chinese counterpart there. But this very prominent Chinese, basically government stooge, took to Chinese equivalent of Twitter to say that Australia was a piece of chewing gum stuck to the shoe of China, and it needs to scrape them off. And that's quite normal rhetoric from the Chinese Communist Party's officials, representatives.
I dare say that does sound a little bit racist, Douglas.
Yeah, I know. You would have thought that. Well, isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that whilst people like, whilst Nancy Pelosi and co are worrying about whether or not saying where the virus came from is racist, and let's not forget, it was only in late February, early March that Nancy Pelosi was still encouraging people in America to go to their local Chinatown in order to show sort of solidarity. And the mayor of Florence at the same time was urging the people of his city to find a Chinese person and hug them in order to defeat racism and coronavirus simultaneously, which turns out to have been the sort of reason perhaps why Florence was in lockdown faster than anyone else. But whilst we were all obsessing with this, is it racist to say that it comes from China? The Chinese are perfectly willing to be as racist as they like about everyone else in the world, as if we needed reminders of that after what they've been doing to the Uyghur people, among others, in recent years. So this is a classic example of where the real world meets our stupidities. The real world of China and co doesn't give a damn about racism, doesn't give a damn about it, but knows that we do, and is willing to say anything it likes about us and manipulate our fears